December 21st, 1945. Winston Churchill sat at his desk in Chartwell, his beloved country estate, when the telegram arrived. He picked it up, read it once, then twice. The words were simple, yet devastating. General George S. Patton Jr., the American commander whose name had struck fear into enemies across North Africa, Sicily, France, and Germany, was dead. Churchill set the telegram down slowly, lit a cigar, and stared out of the window, letting the news settle in the quiet of the evening. When he finally spoke, it wasn't with the eloquence of the orator who had rallied a nation through its darkest hours. His words were blunt, even brutal, revealing a truth that rarely escaped his public speeches. America had produced a general unlike any Britain had seen in decades, a commander of pure, ruthless aggression, a man who won wars not with elegance, but with speed, violence, and unflinching audacity. And now, that weapon was gone. To understand why Churchill's reaction was so intense, you need to understand what Patton represented to him. Britain had spent 6 grueling years at war, nearly destroyed in the process. Cities lay in rubble, the economy was bankrupt, and an entire generation of men had been killed or maimed. By 1945, the country was exhausted beyond imagination. Britain could no longer fight wars alone. The days of military dominance were over, and America had emerged as the true engine of victory. Its industrial might, its manpower, and increasingly its military leadership would shape the post-war world. And among American generals, Patton stood apart, a force of nature on the battlefield. Churchill had followed Patton's campaigns closely. He had watched the American commander drive his troops forward at impossible speeds, exploiting breakthroughs while others hesitated. He had seen Patton overwhelm enemies through relentless aggression, and in that style of warfare, Churchill recognized something Britain had once practiced in its youth, a willingness to strike ruthlessly, to win through daring and decisiveness. So, when he read that Patton had died in a car accident, his thoughts were immediate and precise. A weapon had been lost, one that the world would come to miss more than it realized. Elizabeth Leighton, Churchill's secretary, was present when he received the news. Years later, she described the moment with startling clarity. Churchill read the telegram silently, then said only 2 words, "Patton's dead." The pause hung heavy in the room. Then came the raw, unfiltered assessment, "Damn shame. Damn bloody shame. The man survives 4 years of war, and dies in a car accident in peacetime. There's a cruel irony in that." Lighting his cigar, he added, "The Americans don't realize what they've lost. Not yet, but they will." This was not the public Churchill, the inspirational speaker. This was the strategist, the man who understood power and its consequences with brutal honesty. Later that evening, Churchill composed formal condolence letters to President Truman and Patton's widow, words carefully crafted and solemn. Yet it was in private conversations with his military chiefs and closest advisers that he revealed the full depth of his thoughts. With Field Marshal Alan Brooke, his chief of the Imperial General Staff, he spoke without restraint. "We don't produce generals like that anymore, Alan," he said. "We produce careful, competent commanders who consider politics, coordinate with allies, fight the civilized way." Patton fought wars the way wars have always been won, through speed, shock, and ruthless exploitation of enemy weakness. Brooke reminded Churchill of Patton's flaws, the slapping incidents, the clashes with other commanders, the constant political headaches. Churchill nodded. That was the price of having a weapon like Patton. Difficult, temperamental, insubordinate, but unparalleled in his ability to achieve decisive results. When the Allies needed breakthroughs, rapid advances, or bold maneuvers that others wouldn't dare attempt, Patton was unmatched. He was a living instrument of war, and like any weapon, required careful direction, but his power was undeniable. Churchill even confessed privately, The tragedy isn't that America has lost Patton. The tragedy is that we never had a Patton of our own. Churchill understood the cultural and strategic differences between British and American military leadership. British generals had become cautious, methodical, shaped by the horrors of World War I and the limitations of a depleted nation. Every life mattered. Every decision weighed against what Britain could afford to lose. America, however, could take risks Britain could not. Patton commanded an army with resources and manpower to spare, willing to pay the price for speed and victory. That was what made him extraordinary, and what made his loss so keenly felt in Churchill's eyes. Even in discussions with Anthony Eden, Churchill was explicit. Patton could accomplish feats that Montgomery could only dream of. Not because Montgomery lacked brilliance, but because the circumstances were different. Patton was free to be audacious, to strike when the cautious would hesitate. And now, with Patton gone, America had lost its most aggressive, fearsome instrument, a general who embodied the unrestrained power of a nation on the rise. Churchill repeatedly referred to Patton as a weapon. He told aides that Americans were sentimental about their generals, wanting them both brilliant and charming. But war was not about charm, it was about destroying the enemy's will to fight. Patton understood this better than anyone. When swift action was needed, the relief of Bastogne, the rapid advance across France, the crossing of the Rhine, Patton delivered, often in ways that defied conventional military logic. He was a weapon, complex and sometimes uncontrollable, but of extraordinary power. Such weapons were rare, Churchill knew, and they did not come along often. The loss of Patton weighed on Churchill not only in terms of military capability but also in strategic foresight. By December 1945, he was already watching the Soviet Union with deep concern. Stalin was consolidating Eastern Europe, refusing to withdraw forces, demonstrating a willingness to challenge the West in ways that would soon demand a new kind of strategy. Churchill recognized that leaders like Patton, decisive, ruthless, willing to intimidate and act, were invaluable not just in war but in peace as a deterrent. The Soviets, he noted, respected force. Patton's presence had been a warning, a credible threat that complicated the calculations of adversaries. And now, that deterrent was gone. Even in conversations with Field Marshal Montgomery, Churchill did not sugarcoat his assessment. "You and Patton never got along," he admitted. "He was arrogant, insubordinate, impossible. But history will remember him, not in spite of his aggression, but because of it." Britain survived through endurance and alliances. Patton won through audacity and relentless drive. That is what will inspire future generations and intimidate enemies. Churchill understood that Britain's approach to war had changed, that its generals could no longer embody the same aggressive spirit, and that America's rise had produced a new type of leader that was irreplaceable. In a private letter to Field Marshal Jan Smuts of South Africa, Churchill distilled his thoughts further. Patton was unsuited for peacetime, politically tone-deaf, socially awkward, and incapable of diplomatic subtlety. But in war, he was magnificent, understanding something modern generals often forgot. Wars are won not by careful accumulation, but by overwhelming application of force at decisive moments. Men like Patton emerge only under the right combination of temperament, training, and historical circumstance. That moment had passed. Britain had lost the ability to produce such men. America had, and now America had lost him too. December 21, 1945, was more than just a date on a calendar. It was the day Churchill realized that the world had lost a warrior unlike any other. Patton's flaws were many, but his qualities, the aggression, the speed, the unflinching drive forward, were irreplaceable. As the post-war world teetered into uncertainty, especially with the looming Soviet threat, the absence of Patton was felt in ways few could see. Churchill understood it fully. The world would miss Patton's particular brand of ruthless competence, and history would remember him not just as a general, but as a weapon whose loss changed the balance of power, just as the age of cautious, careful warfare was taking hold.